All right, so let's call this house to order. On the government side, we have Masterpiece. On the opposition side, we have DeVengers. And debating on the motion that this house believes that activists who break the law while fighting for their cause are justified, would like to recognize the Prime Minister to open this debate. Here.
May I start?
Sure, when you're ready.
So, Speaker, our team believes that the reason why both sides are having this debate is because the government and opposition both want to create a safer world and a better world for its citizens to live in. We both want people to live fair lives where the government respects their opinions and a safer society where they're able to freely interact with whoever they want. Now, having that said, let me just briefly characterize to you today's policy. So, what the government will do for today's motion is, while justifying these activists to commit crimes, while doing this, we will also be compensating the harms for the harms that these activists have committed in their crimes. For example, if these activists create the crime of breaking someone's property, we will be compensating that property's owner and give them enough money to repair that certain property. Now, having that said, let me directly move to our team's first argument and prove to you why we propose today's motion. So, Speaker, we believe that there's actually a pretty urgent problem in today's society, and it is that in the status quo, minorities are getting very unfair treatment compared to other members of society, and because of their identity, and because of the simple reason that they are minorities, they are unable to get a job, and they're getting countless disadvantages compared to other groups of people. They're even being discriminated just in their every day-to-day lives. So we believe that this problem of discrimination towards minorities is very urgent. However, Speaker, in the status quo, protests are actually currently happening to try to tackle with these issues. However, they are proving to be very ineffective. The main reason why we believe that this is the case and why they are so ineffective is that the government actually does not give these activists much attention. They do not listen to these ideas of ideas that are being mentioned in these protests by these activists. So we believe that passing this motion will actually be the only and the best way for these protests to be effective, because in the status quo, the opposition's world is currently the case. And in a restricted environment like this, where they're not justified to commit any crimes, these protests are proving to be completely ineffective. Because in the perspective of the government, in our world, society is currently being harmed, and these activists are causing harms in the first place because the government has failed to listen to their ideas. And now in our world, because they're committing these crimes, in order to end this harm that is constantly going towards society, the government will actually try to fix the problems that are being identified through these protests by these activists, and therefore this will empower these ideas of these activists and help society run more efficiently and effectively according to these ideas of the activists, and therefore the problem will be fixed. Problems that I've identified earlier in my speech will be fixed more efficiently. Now, having that said, let me move on to the second argument, where I will characterize to you the actions of these activists. So, Speaker, I want to characterize to and emphasize that the purpose of the crimes that these activists commit in the first place is not to harm society in any way. In fact, we believe that it is rather the exact opposite of my previous case, because it is rather to improve it, not to harm in any way. These people do not have notorious purposes, Speaker, because some problems they are doing this crime because some problems have been identified in society in the first place. No, thank you, and they're urgently trying to solve this problem. Also, we believe that it is actually worth mentioning at this point that these activists will not overuse this power and overuse this power. They will not abuse this power to commit a crime that is completely unrelated with the issues that is going on in society. Because again, Speaker, these people are activists, and they know that once they commit a crime for absolutely no reason, once they commit an extremely heinous crime, then the value of the way society actually perceives these activists will greatly drop. And obviously, they do not want that to happen, since their primary purpose of even committing these crimes in the first place is for society to recognize them more, to respect their ideas more, and since they do not want society's perception and the way they view these activists they do not want it to drop, they will not be overusing or abusing this power in any way. So the cause of these crimes are the government, Speaker. These activists are committing these crimes to make the government pay more attention to them, to listen to these ideas more frequently. So by punishing minorities for the effects of these crimes, we believe that the government is just pushing the burden towards activists, because of the fact the simple fact that they do not actually have much power in society. So we believe that the government is in the opposition's case, the government is only just passing on the burdens of these crimes to these minorities, even though the underlying cause is the government. Therefore, I'm proud to propose.
All right, we thank the Prime Minister for opening the case of the opposition side. To respond and open the case of the opposition, would like to invite the Leader of the Opposition. Here. You may begin when you are ready.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So, Mr. Speaker, yes, there would be attention towards these activists, but however, we want to question the government team if this will actually be positive ones. With about that point where breaking the laws itself means that they're actually going to give harms and did a justified action that the rest of the society does not agree on. So directly moving on to our first argument, where our rebuttals will be included in these, will be about they actually failed to fulfill the fundamental role of the activist from the very first place. So we have mainly two levels of analysis to explain this argument. So firstly, about just like the previous speaker has mentioned, we see mentioning activists themselves are meaning that they are minorities, or they actually are supporting the minorities in order to empower the minority right? So in this case, what is their role is to actually empower the minority rights, where yes, they do need attention, like their team has mentioned, but however, what is their team actually going to do? They're actually going to provide extremely negative attention to them, which I will furthermore explain the logical link in our second analysis. So second analysis, why did they actually fail to achieve their role in their team? So if it's the case where it is not to actually support and impart the minority rights for them, but however, it increases the stereotypes and whatnot, we say that it is not fulfilling the fundamental role of the activist. So we say that it will actually be the case of the breaking laws. We believe that this is actually going to not fulfill the very fundamental role of these activists. So let's now move on to our logical link. So first of all, as mentioned, there would be actually certain attention, but however, who led these attention, who prepares the information for these people to actually have these attention? We say it is the media. So in this case, how would the media actually paraphrase these activists? So we say that these media would actually depict these activists as criminals rather than people who are actually running great campaigns that are beneficial to us. Why? That is how they actually depict their minority as, where they actually want is profit from the majorities agreeing to these factors and clicking to these media so they actually provide these profit, right? So in this case, we say that now these media is not going to actually show the beneficial images of these activists. So as this being said, we believe that now as every single what they actually see is that extreme violence and media depicts minorities as criminals, we say that this naturally leads to the reinforces of the stereotypes about, oh, they're really stupid, or the only method they can actually use is breaking laws that we already see from the majority of the people in the current status quo. So let's see what we actually have for the alternative. So if alternatives, for example, non-violent protest, also going to create these harms and not fulfill the fundamental role of activists? We say no, taking the example of the Me Too movement. We say it actually eliminates the very fundamental reasons of these harms at the first place, and therefore we believe that it is not even fulfilling the very fundamental role from the get-go. So directly moving on to our second argument, will furthermore prove why it is never actually justified in the meanings of society's rule. So we believe that the law should be actually kept no matter who are actually doing this, or no one could actually be exempt by keeping the law, right? So in this case, we say that laws that in some minority cases, we believe that the laws they actually break are pretty much irrelevant to their movements. So unlike what their prime minister has actually mentioned, we already have examples like stealing channel backs, starting participating in the BLM movement. So Mr. Speaker, we say there is no relevance in any kind of movements in these stealing channel backs. But secondly, we also believe that they can actually achieve exactly the same benefits from non-violent protests, but only for catching attention, which I already previously rebutted to this point by how these would actually be attentions that are extremely negative. So Mr. Speaker, I'm therefore very proud to oppose.
We thank the Leader of the Opposition. For that speech. To continue the speech of the affirmative team, we'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
May I start?
Yes, you may.
So, Mr. Madam Speaker, both government and opposition want to take care of these minorities who are not getting represented in the status quo. But we believe that the best way and the only way to represent minorities is using violence and using not following the laws, because due to the fact that in the status quo that they're getting so much unfair treatment, they tried so much ways of not trying to break the laws. Nothing is getting emphasized by the government. We believe that even if it gets emphasized in society, we believe that what we want to firstly show is to the government. And it's not bad that society recognizes the problem, but we believe that we should emphasize the government first, and government is the first priority, which this activist should show the problem. Let me go on to my rebuttals to explain why. Okay, going on to the rebuttals, who can actually better help this minority? The opposition thinks that actually, before I go on, let me emphasize the status quo. In the status quo, these minorities are getting such unfair treatment because they can't it is even hard for them to live in the first place, because they have to live thinking of others' views and thinking of how others think of them. They have to hide the fact that they are minorities, and it is harder for them to get actually get a work and a job just due to the fact that the minorities, and then they're the ones who get, many of them are the ones who get harmed from this crime. For example, the George Floyd which made the black activists stand up, such as Black Lives Matter. He died from this white police just due to the fact that he was holding some kind of drugs. I believe that this white police, who was actually discriminatory towards black, was actually holding him up until when he said it was hard for him to breathe. I believe that minorities like this is living in such a hard world, and that they need an urgent solution, and the solution right now. They said that this won't give the positive effect in the first place, but we believe that we don't care about the society as a first priority, as I mentioned. We believe that the first priority that should recognize the problem is the government, and the best way for the government to notice the problem is actually to go against the laws, because as the Prime Minister already told you, government, since it's going harm and it's giving effect to the society, they have to naturally give of thoughts, and they have to naturally think about this problem just due to the fact that it costs something to the society. And we believe that the policy change is the most urgent thing in the status quo, because this minorities have to live at the first place to do anything, to get over this perception, to get over this stereotypes that they're worried about. They have to live in the status quo. Minorities cannot live in the status quo because these minorities are in such a hard position where they can't earn even money. They cannot even earn minimal money, that it is hard for their living. I believe that due to this fact, we first need to prioritize the life of the minorities. I believe that the government team way better does this, because the government team is to make the government recognize this problem in the status quo. I believe that after this going on, society would also agree and see the problem, as I'll explain our third argument. We believe that they also said that they should achieve the same benefits from it by not breaking the law. But first, we believe that this is very, very slow in situation, because they have to go out and they have to wait until so much people actually comes into this that government cannot control. I believe that this time limit is such a long time that minorities have to suffer all this time, and they will die out all during this time. And this is why we believe that this problem is such an urgent thing. And before I go on to argument, I want to ask the opposition team, what is the opposition team doing in the status quo to help the minorities? We already proved that in the status quo, minorities are living a hard life, and I believe that the opposition team is doing nothing to help these minorities. Turning on to our third argument, which is also the rebuttal of attention, is the attention good. Okay, thirdly, about the society. Not only the government, society will have more interest due to the fact that it will give more interest, and this will lead to the minority empowerment, because they will have more interest towards this root of the problem. And technically, basically means that this will lead to a minority empowerment. And you don't have to worry about this hatred towards minorities. Because giving you an example of Black Lives Matter, even if it used violence, no one blamed the Blacks that they were like such a bad people. We believe that this is due to the fact that they know this is a real problem. And we believe that the majorities will always stand for the minorities. And for this reason, I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Right, we thank the Deputy Prime Minister. To move on to the case of the opposition side, would like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
To this point of the debate, government talked about how they can better tell people about the ideologies. However, when they acknowledge the fact that these harms are very detrimental or these harms are too big, that the government even needs to compensate these people, they were not able to engage the fact that people will criminalize the activists as criminals, right? Let me straightly move on to my rebuttals. I have total of 4 rebuttals towards the previous speaker. Firstly, they talk about how there will be so much unfair treatment towards the people, right? 2 levels of response to this. Firstly, we think that we already acknowledge the fact that there are unfair treatment in this world, but we actually are proposing a more effective and less violent solution because of the fact that I already mentioned about criminalization of these people, right? We think that we need a more effective policy, but they fail to engage to this point, which I will further explain on. But then secondly, we think that we actually have other solutions. For example, like people like Mahatma Gandhi. These people actually are able to give less violent actions, but also solve the problem, right? Second rebuttal is about their rebuttal towards the policy, right? They talk about how they can compensate the harms. But however, we think that even if this is actually the fact that they need to compensate these people, we think that because of the fact that this is after the harm happened, they cannot cover all the harms. For example, mental harm, we think that these are the points where they cannot compensate these kind of harms, right? But then third rebuttal about how they talk about how they need to solve the urgent problem. But we see that they are not seeing the efficiency of this policy, right? Let me emphasize what the important thing that we need to solve is. For example, George Floyd in BLM, let me take the example for short, right? We needed to convince the police officers for that sure, but not only the normal citizens, but our main role is to convince those kind of people who have very strong bad opinions about these people. We think that this is a root cause of this problem, but then we think that these people actually, because of the fact that they are pointed as bad people and where people are even committing crimes, it is easier for them to characterize these people as criminals. We think that this is the reason why they don't have the efficiency of this policy. Lastly, they talk about how government did not listen until these people give violence, right? Firstly, we think that this is actually directly rebutting to their point, because why would the government try to listen to government's failure of not being able to listen to these people? We think that they will rather try to characterize these people as criminals, where in the society where they were not able to protect these people, they needed to provide a clear analysis about why these people also have the incentive to take care of these people when those people are showing violence just because of the fact that the government was not able to listen to them. But then secondly, as we have constantly been mentioning, we think that there are lots of other alternatives, and therefore I'm very proud to propose. Our last argument is about how this concept justifies a lot of more people committing crimes. 2 levels of analysis also for this argument. Firstly, I would generally characterize what these people are. We cannot check ideology and read the thoughts of the people. It is hard to check the beliefs and whether or not the person is an activist or something. This is actually a crucial point where they are not able to check who is justifiable and who is not, right? Second level of analysis, criminals can mostly be justified for their acts, and this will bring chaos, right? 2 things that are mainly justified. First, in the lowest level, for example, for BLM, some people go to
to Chanel and steal bags, right? Some people might steal for their ideology, but then we know that for sure that a minority in that crowd is stealing for their good. I think that this can be used as a crucial point where they're risking some of their people and actually making some people criminals and making them justified because of nothing, right? Secondly, in a strong level, criminals will lie and package their acts as justified and tell people that it was just for their ideology, for example, for their rights. We think that they cannot prevent this harm and they're justifying all acts. This is actually harming the people who are in the crimes, and I think that the opposition, the government now needs to respond to this, and I'm very proud to oppose.
Right, we thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Would like to invite the Government Whip Speaker to the podium.
May I start? Mr. Speaker, in the status quo, these minorities is actually even facing a threat to their lives because of the reason that they are minorities. Like they can even die in the streets because police are being discriminatory to them, and they're facing a lot of discrimination in the society. To solve this problem, they did a lot of things peaceful. They even did, yes, they did like these peaceful protests or things like this. They affect a lot of things. However, the society didn't change. And the last way they have to change the society is committing a crime, and this will bring a lot of attention, and we believe that this could also result as a change to the government. So actually we believe that the acts of the activists committing a crime in the crime as a cause to solve this minorities problem should be justifiable. So before moving on to the two main clashes that are found in today's debate, so there's I explain that it is very easy to abuse this laws and just say that I'm an activist, so don't punish me. However, as the motion states, it states that for their cause, which means that it should be only done, it is only justified when it is in the process of like social movements or protests happening. Like we cannot say that I just went to the street and just stole a wallet of a random people and say that this was for these minorities empowerment. And absolutely people know that this was not for minority empowerment, so no abuse will actually happen. So moving on to the first clash that I found in today's debate, which side can benefit the minorities better. There's I explained a negative attention to activists and minorities such as they are violent or things like this will happen because media will frame them in the bad way because they have broken the law. Firstly, there will be no negative attention. People are rational, that they know that the reason and the cause of these crimes happened was the discrimination and was the problem of the society. They will just try to see what was the cause of the problem. And we could see this in the example as our previous speaker mentioned, that in the protest and the social movement of Black Lives Matter, this has a lot of like violence acts. They even like throw like fireballs or things like this to these police. However, the media of the world actually say that the problem was on the government and on the police that actually killed George Floyd. And as we can see in this example, that there will be no more like negative attention because they like had committed crime for their cause. And secondly, even if we could increase for some people will have increased negative attention for these activists, actually our side can at least solve the problems in the government, in the policies that are discriminatory towards this minorities. We could achieve it because government will try to solve the problem to protect the citizens, at least to prevent their citizens of these majority citizens from being like uncomfortable just because of the crimes happened by the minorities. So there will be even more incentive for the government to solve the problems and solve these discriminatory policies for the minorities, such as discrimination in police treatment or things like this. So we could at least achieve the minimum life of the minorities, minimum right that they could live in our society, actually our team is better. And also these things are impossible with peaceful protests. We have done a lot of things and this government didn't change because the society has not a lot of uncomfortableness because of these protests of these minorities. And now we have the last choice, which is committing a crime and getting more attention. And by this is the only way to solve the urgent problem the minorities are facing. They could be killed in the streets and saving these lives of the minorities. So because our side is a side who can benefit this minorities better are to take this class. And the second class is about can activists be an explosion of this law. There's a thing that everyone should follow the law because they have committed or harm to these victims. Firstly, we will compensate these victims from the government. And there's also said that like we could not compensate. There are harms that could not be compensated, like mental harms. However, it is the same. If just these activists have committed a crime like and gave mental harm to the majorities, their side cannot even compensate that. So our side and their side is the same. And also because the cause of the crime was the government, also society, we believe that the burden should be also taken by the government, not pushing the burden to the minorities so they can be excluded. So for this reason, I think it's very proud to propose.
All right, we thank the previous speaker. We'd like to invite the opposition whip to the podium.
Okay.
Judge, why is this movement happening in the first place? In other words, why is the problem actually important, or why was the problem actually fundamentally happening in the first place, right? Why is discrimination happening? We see that it's because of the critics, and it's because of the white people who think Black people as bad, right? Like our Deputy Prime Minister said, we see that this is the very fundamental problem, right? It's because of the critics, and it's because of the bad perceptions of the society towards the Black people and the other minorities, and that's why the harms that they mentioned, i.e., they're getting less job opportunities and whatnot. The reason that all of these things are happening is due to the less positive perspective towards them. We see that side government cannot actually solve this problem, but then they're actually worsening the problem, and thus we see that their spasmodic movement cannot actually take this debate home. So with this being said, first clash, will these movements that break the laws will be effective? So basically this clash is a comparison between short media attention versus the negative attention and the criminalization of these minorities. So speakers, two things. Firstly, we agree, right? We never actually disagree to the severity and the sensitivity of the problem, right? But speakers, we see that because of the sensitivity, because of the attention that these people are getting due to the severity of the problem, we see mainly two harms happening if they only suggest a very quick and bold movement, right? A, when you actually want to persuade the government, you need to persuade the society. Why is this so? Like our deputy and our leader of opposition has already honorably mentioned, we see that in order for a policy to be passed for minorities, for social movements, for whatever thing, the government needs to have the majority of the citizens actually agreeing for this. And we see that then in this case, they actually need to persuade the society, but this is not, of course, happening because of the violent manners of these people, right? But then B, we see that the media's positive views towards the minorities is extremely important. Why is this so? Because media is the main stakeholder who's characterizing these minorities, who's characterizing the society. And we see that when they're just characterizing them and criminalizing them, we see that this is even bad, especially when it leads to normalization, like our prime minister, like our leader of opposition has already mentioned. But then secondly, let's compare the two solutions, right? Peaceful protest versus violent ones, right? So then first thing, let's talk about the matter of time, right? So speakers, we see that yes, it's true that ours will take more time, right? However, speakers, when we're actually considering the time, right? When we're considering the time that the movement will be recorded or the movement will be engraved in the society, we see that ours has more sufficiency, or ours will actually have more sustainability. Why is this so? It's because firstly, in our side, the government has the incentive to keep that. The government has the incentive to keep that positive because they don't want any violent things, right? But then secondly, we see that society also wants these kinds of society moves, these kinds of movements, and that's why the society is even going to like these movements even more, right? But then secondly, let's talk about efficiency and compare between the peaceful protests versus the violent ones. So then two things here as well. So then firstly, we see that just giving a spasmodic attention isn't of course good, like I mentioned. But then secondly, why is this peaceful good? It's because firstly, people that are because we'll actually increase a critical mass because people who aren't even in the minorities will likely to be joined, right? Because it's peaceful. But then secondly, it minimizes the unnecessary sacrifices. And we see that thus this is even more efficient, right? So with this being said, second clash, is it ever justified to break the laws under the name of social movement? So firstly, in their whip, they suddenly come out and they talk about government failure, right? So they talk about last choice, how the government provided them and how the government actually forced them to actually be forced into this situation. So we see that let's provide a situation, right? If I was so poor and if I was so born poor and the government actually failed to give me enough welfares, we see that side government is actually saying that, oh, I can just go around and kill people. I can just go around and lift stores, right? Why is this so? Because they're saying that just because of government failure, I can just break any kinds of rules, right? Under the name of social activism as a poor. We see that this can be never justified, right? But then secondly, they even agreed to the harms, right? Like our deputy prime minister said, like our deputy leader of opposition said, we see that there are traumatic harms, we see that there are physical harms, and we see that there are financial harms, and we see that these harms cannot be all compensated when actually our peaceful alternative can actually minimize these harms. And thus we see that our side has to take the debate home because of two reasons. Firstly, we principally actually justified it, and secondly, we give more practical benefits to these minorities. Thus, we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, we thank the opposition whip. To close the debate for the opposition side, let's invite the opposition reply speaker.
Okay, so I'll start. So, Judge, in today's debate was mainly both teams had the same goal, which was to empower the minority rights. Looking at this, the solution that both teams approached were different. The government team approached this the solution, like the end goal, as the solution of promoting violence, protests in their society, and the opposition team approached this as non-violence existing in their society. From here, let's look at which policy, which solution is much more better and much more beneficial to these main four stakeholders that I'll discuss in my speech. So firstly, let's look at the practical benefits to these four stakeholders. So the main stakeholder, the first stakeholder that I'll focus on is the government. So firstly, our team believes that the government believes that the government isn't able to give any positive perspectives to the government because our honorable deputy speaker has talked about how the reason why they're hiding, why the government is going to frame these people like as if they're criminals, is because this is basically these minorities are basically pointing out, this is basically showing the government failure happening in their society, which means that the government isn't even able to basically frame this as a positive look, and they aren't able to have a positive look in their society. But however, in our society, we are able to give have the government's positive argument, positive perspective in this problem because our honorable whip speaker mentioned about how if the majority agrees to this, then this leads to the government seeing this as a positive thing, which means that their team isn't able to do this, which means that they won't even be able to bring the positive look from the government. And secondly, the second stakeholder of today's debate is the minorities. Let's see in the end of this debate, after both solutions work out, let's see which is more effective. So looking at the minorities, the first thing that will happen to the government side is that, as our first speaker mentioned, as our honorable LO mentioned, this won't keep the purpose, because the end goal of these activists is to basically improve and empower the minorities, right? But Mr. Joyce, do you really think that that's going to happen in their side? Because their side is basically just ignoring the minority rights, and their side is basically saying that framing minorities as if they're criminals, as I mentioned from explaining about my previous stakeholder. And connecting this, let's move on to the third stakeholder, which is about the activists. Let's see if the public will have a good look of the activists connecting to the minorities. So as I kept on mentioning, Mr. Judge, our team believes that the activists will also be formed bad, because in the Korean society, they have been denying the fact that the activists will abuse their power. But however, in the Korean society, there's a proof about why this is going to happen. Because in the BLM movements, activists stole stuff from Chanel, and we can't see the clear connection between this. This is shown of abuse of power from these activists. And lastly, let's move on to the last stakeholders, which is the individuals, the normal individuals. And at the end of this debate, let's see how they would get effective. So
let's look at the normal individual, what they will think while this process, while the government team is implementing this, passing this motion, what they will think. So mainly the individual will think about how the government, about how these minorities are going to be very, the only thing that they can do is to violently protest instead of doing like this movement, like the Me Too movement, which was very impactful for their citizens, as we mentioned from our LO speaker, Mr. Judge. And our team believes that this will, in our opposition side, we are able to preserve the minorities' right. We are able to show these citizens about how the minorities is getting the difficulties. And even though this takes a long time, our team believes that this is better, going to benefit the minorities and all of the other stakeholders that we mentioned. Therefore, Mr. Judge, we beg you to propose. We beg you to oppose.
All right, we thank the opposition reply speaker. To finally close this debate, let's have the government reply speaker.
So what we have to think about in today's debate is who can help the minorities more, who can help the minorities who are getting so much harm in today's debate and in the society. And we believe that in today's debate, opposition side is not knowing how much severe problem that minorities are facing on, and we believe that our side can keep on analyzing the problem that those alternatives their side is talking about, or those harm their side is talking about, is don't care because there is so much harm that the minorities are facing in today's debate. So let me talk about why our side is the one who's benefiting minorities more. So the harm that their side talk about, like there will be like minorities will be criminalized in today's debate if we follow our side, because like they will have bad perspective for the minorities. However, first of all, our previous speaker already proved that there will be no negative perspective that is existing for the minorities, and we believe that our previous speaker already said that society will also know that there is unfair treatment that the minorities get, and because of this we already proved the criminalized that their side is talking about it doesn't exist, and we proved about it. And also let me talk about this part, like even if we assume the criminalized exists in their side, even if we assume that there's a harm that is given for minorities, if we follow our case, we don't care about it. We believe that there's so many harm that minorities are getting, and we believe that our side keep on analyzing about this problem. So like what we are talking about, this problem is like even government is discriminating, and they have a problem like surviving in a society. Like they don't care, like a George Floyd, those minorities can die by the police anyway, like when they are working on the street. And we believe that this is the problem that minorities are facing on. This is the problem that minorities have to overcome, and by the activists. And we believe that this is the problem that even though they get a bad perspective, if they get attention from the government, if they can like change the policy by breaking a law and like stop this problem, we believe that that is the thing that we want to achieve. That is the thing that that is the thing that is valuable, and that is the thing that benefit the minorities. Because what problem that really minorities are facing is this problem. The government is even like discriminating the minorities, and that this is very urgent and severe problem that minorities are facing too. And we are the ones solving this problem, because there's a talk about like peaceful protest or any other way that there's a talk about, it will never help with this problem, because it is so slow, and this can not get attention from the government. And with the breaking law is the only way to get attention and help with this problem. And with the, because of this, we are really helping the minorities, not their side who's just talking about the slow and like not really effective alternatives to help this minority, which is like peaceful protest or other things. And when we prove this point that their side cannot help the minorities with this peaceful and protest, we believe that there's nothing that their side is doing in today's debate to help the minorities, who are the ones who really have to think about who is the main stakeholder in today's debate. And we believe that because of this, our side is the one who's taking the debate home, and I'm proud to propose.
All right, we thank the government reply speaker and everyone. Congratulations for finishing all 4 rounds with a bang today. I think everyone performed so well. Okay, so good job.